The quiet town of Bozeman, Montana, rests in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. In autumn of 2021, the streets were painted with falling leaves, and the crisp air carried the promise of winter. Among the town's 50,000 residents, one young woman stood out, not because of fame or wealth, but because of her kindness and the dream she carried. Her name was Emily Parker. Emily was 26 years old, a graduate student at Montana State University, and a daughter, a sister, and a friend whose presence seemed to light up every space she entered. She lived in a small apartment near campus, the kind filled with secondhand furniture, shelves of well-worn books, and photographs taped to the walls. Her home reflected her character, simple, warm, and filled with life. Her passion was environmental science. Emily believed in protecting the natural world with a dedication that inspired both classmates and professors. She spent long hours in the university labs, analyzing soil samples and writing research papers that she hoped would one day influence real conservation work. But her heart was not bound by books and research alone. On weekends, she would lace up her boots and disappear into the wilderness, following mountain trails until she reached quiet places where the only sounds were rushing rivers and the calls of birds overhead. Those who knew her say she had an almost spiritual connection to nature. Friends remembered how she would pause during hikes to run her fingers over tree bark, or to admire wildflowers growing between rocks. To Emily, the outdoors was not just a subject of study. It was her sanctuary. Her family described her as the heart of their home. Susan Parker, Emily's mother, often said that Emily's laughter could change the mood of an entire room. Her younger brother, Michael, looked up to her as both a mentor and a protector. When Michael struggled in school, it was Emily who stayed up late, guiding him through assignments, her patience never running thin. To her father, David Parker, Emily was the bridge that held the family together. Despite her demanding studies, Emily always found time for others. She worked part-time at Meadow Lane Books, a cozy local bookstore where her smile welcomed customers as warmly as the smell of freshly brewed coffee in the corner cafe. Locals remember her as the young woman who recommended the perfect novel to a child, or who stayed late helping an elderly customer find large print editions. She did not see it as a job. For Emily, it was another way to connect with people. Her friends often joked that Emily's greatest flaw was her inability to say no. She volunteered at community events, tutored fellow students, and even fostered stray animals until permanent homes could be found. Her apartment sometimes echoed with the sound of kittens, and her social media was filled with photos of rescued dogs she had helped nurse back to health. But Emily was not simply defined by kindness. She was ambitious. She dreamed of working with international conservation groups, protecting endangered species, and traveling to forests across the globe. Her journals, later found by her family, contained lists of goals and places she longed to see: Kenya, Costa Rica, the Amazon. To her, the future seemed limitless. Friends noticed how her personality combined intelligence with humility. Emily was brilliant in her studies, yet she never spoke to impress. Instead, she listened. When someone shared their troubles, Emily's eyes locked onto theirs, her attention unwavering, as if their pain was her own. It was this quality that earned her not just friends, but deep trust. In Bozeman, her circle was wide. Fellow students admired her work ethic. Neighbors waved when she returned from hikes, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Parents at the bookstore saw her as a role model for their children. She was not extraordinary in the way of celebrities or leaders, but in her everyday life, Emily left a mark on almost everyone she met. Yet behind her busy schedule and her warm personality, Emily carried her own struggles. Like many graduate students, she battled stress, financial worries, and the weight of expectations. She worked late nights to balance school and part-time employment. Friends remembered how she sometimes arrived at class with dark circles under her eyes, fueled only by coffee and determination. Still, she rarely complained. To Emily, hard work was a path to the future she believed in so deeply. The fall of 2021 was supposed to be a season of progress. Emily had nearly finished the first stage of her thesis, and she was preparing to present her findings at an upcoming conference. Her professors praised her innovative thinking, calling her one of the most promising young researchers in the program. For her family, this was a time of pride. For Emily, it was a moment when all the pieces of her life seemed to be falling into place. But life in small towns carries its own shadows. Beneath the safety of familiar streets and friendly smiles, dangers can lurk unnoticed. Emily's openness and trust, qualities that defined her, also made her vulnerable. Her friends never imagined that the young woman who offered so much light to the world would soon find herself in the center of a darkness no one could have predicted. On her last weekend before everything changed, Emily visited her parents' home for dinner. Susan remembered how Emily laughed over the family's old stories, promising to bring a homemade pie for Thanksgiving. Michael recalled her teasing him about his new haircut. To everyone at that table, it felt like just another ordinary evening. They could not know it would be one of their last memories together. In those final days, Emily's life seemed untouched by fear. She walked the same campus paths, chatted with bookstore customers, and made plans for the future. She did not realize that her time in Bozeman, her studies, and her dreams were all about to be cut short in a way that would shake the town forever. Her story was about to change, because in the weeks that followed, Emily Parker would vanish from the world she loved so deeply, and the mystery of what happened to her would leave Bozeman reeling. October 19, 2021, began as an ordinary autumn day in Bozeman. The air carried the sharp chill of the season, and by evening, temperatures dipped close to freezing. For most residents, the night meant warmth inside their homes. But for Emily Parker, it was just another long evening of work at the university library. She had been preparing for a major presentation, reviewing charts and notes until her eyes grew heavy. At 10:15 p.m., she packed her backpack, waved to a classmate, and stepped into the cold night. The campus was quiet. Lampposts cast yellow pools of light on empty sidewalks. Leaves scraped across the pavement in sudden gusts of wind. Security cameras captured Emily walking toward her car in the university parking lot. She wore a dark green jacket, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. It was the last confirmed image of her alive. At 10:30 p.m., she texted her mother, "Heading home now. Talk tomorrow." That message would later haunt Susan Parker, replaying in her mind like an unfinished sentence. When midnight came and Emily did not return calls, no one panicked at first. Her friends assumed she had fallen asleep after studying. But by morning, concern turned to fear. At 7:45 a.m., a jogger on the Sourdough Canyon trailhead, a short drive from campus, noticed something unusual. A silver Toyota Corolla sat alone in the gravel lot. Its driver's door was locked, but inside, Emily's backpack rested on the passenger seat. Her phone lay on the console, battery drained. To the jogger, it felt wrong. Cars did not stay overnight at that trailhead. He reported it to authorities. By 9 a.m., deputies from the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office were on scene. The sight chilled them. A young woman's car abandoned in the early morning hours. So close to wilderness suggested danger. They opened the vehicle and confirmed what everyone feared. The car belonged to Emily Parker. Word spread quickly. By noon, search teams were mobilized. Officers, volunteers, and rescue dogs combed the trail and surrounding woods. Helicopters hovered overhead, their spotlights cutting across the treetops. Flyers with Emily's face appeared in shop windows and on telephone poles. Her parents rushed to Bozeman, hearts heavy with dread. At the trailhead, Susan Parker stood near the park patrol cars, clutching her daughter's photograph, her voice breaking as she asked the same question again and again. Where is she? For days, the search stretched across miles of rugged land. Creeks were dragged. Caves were examined. Dozens of volunteers braved freezing nights with flashlights and hope. But no trace of Emily appeared. Investigators reconstructed her final hours with painful precision. They confirmed her exit from the library at 10:15. They traced her car, leaving the campus parking lot at 10:22. But at some point, she diverted from her route home. Why she stopped at the Sourdough Canyon trailhead remained a haunting question. Did someone lure her there? Did she meet someone she trusted? Or was she forced? Each possibility darkened the atmosphere of the investigation. Detectives scoured security cameras along the main roads. Some footage showed her Toyota heading south out of town, but there was a blind spot between the city streets and the isolated trail. That blind spot became the focus of endless speculation. As days turned into weeks, the hope of finding Emily alive began to fade. Her friends gathered at candlelight vigils, holding each other as prayers filled the night sky. Her professors described her empty seat in class as a void impossible to ignore. On November 6th, nearly 3 weeks after her disappearance, the search came to its tragic end. A group of hunters deep in the Highlight foothills, several miles from the trailhead, stumbled upon a scene that froze them in place. In a clearing, partially hidden beneath fallen branches, lay the remains of a young woman. Deputies arrived quickly, securing the area with tape. Forensic teams worked carefully, documenting every detail before moving the body. Though the scene was heavily disturbed by weather and wildlife, Identification came swiftly. The victim was Emily Parker. News of the discovery spread across Bozeman like wildfire. Strangers wept openly in grocery stores. At the bookstore where she had worked, customers left flowers at the entrance. On campus, her classmates gathered in silence, struggling to comprehend that the woman who had walked beside them only weeks earlier was now gone. The Parker family was shattered. Susan and David released a brief statement through law enforcement. Our Emily was taken from us too soon. She was our joy, our light, and our future. We ask for privacy as we grieve. The investigation shifted from a missing person case to a homicide. Detectives now face a more chilling task, unraveling what happened in those final hours, and who was responsible for cutting short the life of a young woman filled with dreams. Bozeman, once known for its calm streets and mountain charm, was now a town haunted by fear. Parents warned their children to avoid walking alone at night. Students organized escorts to cross campus after dark. Residents locked their doors earlier, wondering if a predator still walked among them. But one question echoed louder than all others. Why Emily? The answer, hidden in evidence yet to be revealed, would take the investigation into darker and more complicated territory. And as detectives pressed forward, the small Montana town braced itself for truths that would prove far more shocking than anyone could imagine. Emily Parker's disappearance was no longer a mystery or chance. It was the beginning of a hunt for a killer. The discovery of Emily Parker's body in the Highlight foothills turned a missing person case into a homicide investigation overnight. For the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office, the pressure was immediate and unrelenting. A young woman had been brutally taken from the heart of Bozeman, and the community demanded answers. Detective Laura Mitchell, newly promoted but seasoned in violent crime cases, was assigned to lead the team. Alongside her was Detective Robert Hale, a veteran officer known for his calm presence and careful eye for detail. Together, they began the difficult process of piecing together Emily's final hours. Their first step was to speak with those who had known her best. Emily's professors at Montana State University describe her as diligent, focused, and without enemies. Her co-workers at Meadow Lane Books echoed the same sentiment. She was kind, approachable, and never spoke ill of anyone. Friends painted a picture of a young woman who carried no grudges and kept her circle of trust open. But as every investigator knows, even the brightest lives carry shadows. Attention quickly shifted to Daniel Ross, Emily's ex-boyfriend. Daniel was a 28-year-old local mechanic. The couple had dated for 2 years before ending their relationship 6 months earlier. Friends said the breakup had been messy. Daniel wanted to reconcile, but Emily had moved on. Arguments were overheard in public, and once, a neighbor reported seeing Daniel outside Emily's apartment late at night. Detectives interviewed him at his shop. Daniel appeared nervous, his hands trembling as he spoke. He insisted he had nothing to do with Emily's disappearance, claiming he had been home alone on the night she vanished. His alibi was weak, with no witnesses to confirm his whereabouts. Investigators noted his agitation, his avoidance of eye contact, and the way his voice cracked when Emily's name was mentioned. Still, suspicion alone was not evidence. To build their case, detectives turned to Emily's phone records. The last message she sent, heading home now, talk tomorrow, offered no clue to danger. Call logs showed no unusual activity. GPS data placed her near the Sourdough Canyon trailhead at 10:45 p.m., but then the signal stopped. Whether her phone was turned off or destroyed remained unclear. Meanwhile, the town of Bozeman became a maze of whispers and rumors. In diners, grocery stores, and gas stations, people speculated about what had happened. Some insisted Daniel was guilty. Others claimed to have seen a stranger's vehicle lurking near the trailhead. Fear grew. Mothers refused to let daughters walk alone after dark. Every unfamiliar face became a possible suspect. Detectives worked tirelessly to chase down every lead. They canvassed neighborhoods near the trail, knocking on doors, asking residents if they had noticed anything unusual that night. Some recalled hearing the sound of a vehicle engine around midnight, but no one could describe the driver. Others mentioned a man in a hooded sweatshirt seen walking near the trail earlier that week. Each account added layers of confusion rather than clarity. Specialized teams joined the effort. Cadaver dogs were deployed again to sweep the woods, searching for trace scents of clothing or objects that might have been left behind. Divers scoured nearby creeks, hoping for discarded evidence. Forensic experts combed through Emily's car, dusting for fingerprints, analyzing fibers, and swabbing for DNA. The results were maddening. Every sample collected either belonged to Emily herself or was too degraded to identify. Detective Mitchell described the frustration in her case notes. We are surrounded by silence. Every road leads nowhere. Every lead collapses into dust. The Parker family remained at the center of the investigation's emotional storm. Susan and David met with detectives regularly, pleading for progress. Michael, Emily's brother, vented his anger at the press, demanding justice. Their grief weighed heavily on the investigators, fueling the urgency but also magnifying the pressure to deliver answers. Weeks stretched into months, and still, no direct link tied anyone to the crime. Daniel Ross remained a strong person of interest, but without evidence, detectives could not move forward with charges. Search warrants at his home and garage revealed nothing suspicious. No clothing fibers, no weapons, no signs of involvement. He hired a lawyer and began avoiding interviews altogether. Other suspects came and went. A drifter was arrested for trespassing near the trailhead, but his alibi placed him in another town at the time of Emily's disappearance. Two hunters, briefly questioned for their inconsistent timelines, were eventually cleared. Each lead, once promising, collapsed under scrutiny. The town grew restless. Bozeman's newspapers ran headlines demanding answers. Community members began questioning whether law enforcement was capable of solving the case. Detectives worked long nights, staring at boards covered with photographs, maps, and timelines. Yet the threads refused to connect. The early investigation revealed just how complex Emily's case was. She was a beloved young woman with no known enemies, no double life, no obvious dangers. Her murder carried no clear motive, no clear suspect, and no clear path forward. The frustration within the sheriff's office mirrored the despair spreading through the community. Bozeman wanted justice, but all investigators could offer was silence. By the end of the first 3 months, the case that had once seemed urgent began to stall. The trail had grown cold before the investigators could even realize it. And with every passing day, the truth of what happened to Emily slipped further into the shadows. Bozeman, Montana, had always been described as a place where neighbors left their doors unlocked and strangers waved on quiet streets. But after Emily Parker's body was found, that image of safety shattered overnight. The community was shaken to its core, and at the heart of it stood the Parker family, who were now facing the unimaginable. Susan Parker, Emily's mother, became the voice of grief and determination. Standing before cameras with trembling hands, she begged for answers. My daughter was kind, she was loved, and she deserved so much more than this. Please, if anyone knows anything, speak up. Her words carried through living rooms, across radio stations, and into the hearts of thousands. Each plea felt like a dagger to those listening, because everyone knew how deeply Emily had been cherished. Vigils soon followed. On chilly October nights, residents gathered in front of the town courthouse. Hundreds stood together, candles glowing against the darkness. Emily's friends spoke of her gentle spirit, her laughter echoing in the mountains she loved to hike. Her professors remember her passion for protecting the environment, her dreams of changing the world. For many, it felt as though a light had been extinguished far too soon, leaving only shadows behind. Across Bozeman, Emily's photograph was everywhere, on flyers taped to shop windows, pinned to bulletin boards, and posted online. Local businesses joined the movement. Coffee shops placed jars on their counters, raising funds for search teams and for the Parker family. Restaurants donated portions of their earnings to help keep the investigation alive. The town, once defined by its quiet pace, was now pulsing with urgency, united by one question: who had done this to Emily? But with unity came fear. Parents no longer allowed their daughters to walk home alone. Doors that had once stayed unlocked at night were now bolted and barred. People glanced over their shoulders, suspicious of neighbors they had known for years. Bozeman was a small town, and the thought that Emily's killer might still be among them was almost too much to bear. Reporters flocked to the city, covering every development. Outside the Parker home, cameras lined the sidewalk, capturing raw moments of sorrow. Susan often appeared, her face etched with exhaustion but her voice steady, determined to keep her daughter's story alive. Emily's father, David Parker, spoke less often, but when he did, his words were quiet and heartbreaking. No parent should ever have to bury their child. We just want justice. Friends of Emily found themselves trapped in grief. Some admitted they could not sleep, without nightmares. Others confessed that they no longer felt safe in the town they once called home. One close friend, Jessica, broke down during a local interview. She was supposed to be in my wedding. She was supposed to live her dreams. Now she is gone, and all we have left are memories. Her tears reflected the pain of an entire generation in Bozeman, robbed of someone who had symbolized hope. The Parker family turned their mourning into action. Susan organized marches through downtown, urging the community not to let Emily's case fade. We cannot let this happen again. We cannot let her death be forgotten. Those words echoed through church halls, schools, and town meetings. Bozeman was grieving, but it was also angry. People wanted justice, and they wanted it now. Despite their efforts, the weeks stretched on with no arrests, no clear answers, and no closure. Flyers began to curl from the cold autumn air. Candles melted into puddles of wax, and prayers seemed to drift unanswered. The Parkers held on to hope, but each passing day felt heavier than the last. For Bozeman, the grief was not fading, it was deepening. And as the community clung to unity and fear in equal measure, one truth became impossible to ignore. Someone in their midst had stolen Emily Parker's life. The question that haunted every street, every family, and every whispered conversation was the same: who will be unmasked as the killer? And as investigators pressed forward, the town waited, desperate for answers. In the first few months after Emily Parker's murder, hope often flickered. But just as quickly, it burned out. Every promising lead collapsed, leaving detectives and the community caught in a cycle of anticipation and disappointment. At the center of suspicion remained Daniel Ross, Emily's ex-boyfriend. He had been interviewed more than once, his history of jealousy well known among her circle of friends. Detectives discovered that he had sent her late-night messages weeks before she vanished, begging her to give their relationship another chance. It was enough to draw serious attention. Yet when investigators dug deeper, Daniel's alibi held. Security cameras placed him at a gas station miles away on the night Emily disappeared. The timestamp matching phone records. What looked like the most likely path to justice dissolved in hours, leaving detectives frustrated and the public restless. Not long after, attention shifted to a drifter seen near the trailhead, where Emily's abandoned car had been found. He was a stranger to town, a man with no steady address, whose scruffy appearance and quiet demeanor raised immediate suspicion. Residents whispered that he matched the description of someone lurking near the bookstore where Emily worked. Deputies tracked him down and questioned him intensely. For a moment, it felt as if the case might break wide open. But the drifter was cleared. His fingerprints did not match anything at the scene, and bus station records showed he had left Bozeman the night before Emily disappeared. Another lead collapsed. Then came the hunters. Two men admitted they had been near the same stretch of woodland where Emily's body was eventually found. Their alibis were shaky, their statements inconsistent. At first, detectives believed they had caught them in a lie. Rumors spread fast. Were these men hiding something sinister? But within weeks, the investigation unraveled again. The men were indeed hunting, but their times were confused due to alcohol. Their story checked out. Once again, suspicion faded into nothing. With each false lead, the community's faith in law enforcement began to erode. Months of searching, interviewing, and analyzing seemed to circle back to the same haunting void. No answers. Candlelight vigils turned into tense town meetings, where residents demanded results. Parents, frightened for their children, asked how a killer could walk freely while detectives stumbled through dead ends. The sheriff's office faced a barrage of criticism from local media, headlines questioning their competence, talk radio hosts fueling frustration. For the detectives themselves, the pressure was suffocating. Every day meant staring at walls covered in timelines, photos, and maps, only to realize they were chasing ghosts. They knew that the first 48 hours after a murder were the most critical, and yet weeks had bled into months with nothing solid to hold on to. Leads went cold before they could even take shape. Tips from the public piled in, some malicious, others well-meaning, but nearly all useless. Rumors spiraled across Bozeman. Was Emily targeted by a stranger, a drifter who vanished before anyone noticed? Or had someone close to her harbored a secret darkness, blending in while the town searched for a shadow? Neighbors eyed one another with suspicion. Friendship strained under the weight of whispered theories. The once peaceful community was now divided by fear and mistrust. The Parkers suffered most of all. They sat through every false lead, every rumor, every broken promise. Susan Parker's face, once lit with determination, now showed exhaustion. She admitted privately to friends that she feared her daughter's killer would never be caught. David Parker grew more withdrawn, speaking less at vigils, his silence heavy with despair. By the end of winter, hope in Bozeman had grown thin. Each so-called breakthrough ended the same way, in silence and disappointment, in another folder closed with no answers inside. The town clung to the belief that justice would come, but in the quiet of their homes, many wondered if Emily's case would remain another tragic unsolved mystery. And yet, even as faith faltered, detectives pressed on. They knew that somewhere, hidden among lies, half-truths, and forgotten details, was a thread that could unravel everything. All they had to do was find it. The case was not dead, only dormant, and the most shocking revelations were still to come. By the spring of 2022, the Parker case had slipped into the shadows of unsolved files. What began with urgency, headlines, and daily updates had slowed into silence. The investigation that once consumed the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office now sat in boxes on metal shelves. Photographs of Emily Parker, soil samples, fibers, and phone records gathering dust under fluorescent lights. Detectives who had poured themselves into the case were reassigned to fresh crimes. A burglary spree across the county, narcotics trafficking along the interstate. These demanded immediate attention. Slowly, Emily's murder was spoken of less inside the station. Her file marked pending review. For Susan Parker, that phrase felt like a knife twisting. Pending review meant forgotten. Pending review meant her daughter's voice might never be heard again. The Parker family lived in the hollow ache of absence. Birthdays passed with an empty chair at the dining table. On Emily's 27th birthday, Susan baked the chocolate cake her daughter had loved since childhood, placing candles on top that were never blown out. David Parker excused himself halfway through the evening, unable to sit in the quiet where laughter should have been. Holidays grew heavier. Christmas morning, once filled with Emily's excitement and carefully chosen gifts, became unbearable. Susan sat by the window, clutching the scarf Emily had knitted for her years before, staring at falling snow. Each snowflake reminded her of the Montana winters her daughter adored. Hikes through white landscapes, hot cocoa after long walks, photographs of frozen rivers on her camera. The beauty of winter had turned cruel, a season that only deepened her loss. Susan refused to stay silent. She wrote letters to state officials, pleading for renewed attention to the case. She called the sheriff's office weekly, her voice trembling with frustration as she asked for updates that rarely existed. Some deputies avoided answering her calls, knowing they had no progress to offer. Others listened in silence, their own guilt heavy as they admitted the trail had gone cold. Bozeman itself began to heal outwardly, but under the surface, scars lingered. Flyers faded on community boards. Candlelight vigils became less frequent. Families locked their doors earlier, but daily life moved forward. New students arrived at Montana State University. Businesses opened. Seasons changed. For the Parkers, time had not moved at all. Their world remained frozen in October 2021, the night Emily vanished. Local media stopped running features about the case, except for the occasional anniversary story. When the one-year mark arrived, a small crowd gathered at the trailhead where Emily's car was found. They held candles, their breath visible in the cold evening air. Susan spoke through tears, saying her daughter deserved answers, deserved justice. Her words echoed to the stillness, but no new leads followed. Inside the sheriff's office, Emily's file waited. Technology advanced elsewhere, new DNA databases, improved forensic software, but none of it had yet been applied to her evidence. The town's resources were limited. Its priorities pulled in too many directions. Detectives whispered their frustration. Knowing cases like Emily's sometimes slipped through the cracks forever. And yet, for Susan, silence was not an option. She became a voice not only for her daughter, but for every family with an unsolved case. She met with advocacy groups, spoke at awareness events, and told Emily's story to anyone who would listen. Her fight was both an act of love and a refusal to surrender to despair. But when the lights dimmed, when speeches ended, and when she returned home, the silence of Emily's absence was unbearable. The Parker house felt emptier with each passing season. The case had gone cold. Files slept in storage. Leads had evaporated. The killer remained free. Still, somewhere in those boxes of evidence lay a secret waiting to be uncovered, a fragment of truth buried in plain sight, waiting for the right eyes to see it. And when that day came, everything in Bozeman would change again. The Parker case lingered in silence for months, gathering dust like so many other unsolved crimes. Yet fate has a way of circling back, and in early 2023, the silence cracked. It began quietly, almost unnoticeably. A new forensic initiative swept across Montana, part of a nationwide push to re-examine cold cases with advanced technology. The Gallatin County Sheriff's Office submitted several old files for review, and among them was Emily Parker's. For years, investigators had believed the evidence held little promise. Clothing fibers, soil samples, faint traces collected from the scene. But in the hands of a modern lab, what was once overlooked now spoke. Technicians at a state-of-the-art facility in Missoula carefully retested Emily's clothing. Using next-generation DNA sequencing, they searched for even the smallest fragment of genetic material. What they found stunned them. Hidden in the folds of her jacket was a partial profile, so faint it had gone undetected by earlier methods. This was no longer a smudge lost in the background. It was evidence with a voice. For the first time in 2 years, there was something new, something alive. The DNA fragment was uploaded into CODIS, the national database. Weeks of waiting followed as analysts cross-checked millions of profiles. Then, on a cold February morning, the call came. There was a hit. At the same time, another piece of evidence stirred back to life. During a records audit, a technician discovered an old hard drive in storage, labeled only with a date from 2021. It contained surveillance backups from a gas station near the trailhead where Emily's car was found. The footage had been dismissed years earlier as too dark, too blurry. Yet, when digital specialists enhanced the images with new software, shadows sharpened into shapes. There was a vehicle, grainy but visible, parked near Emily's car in the early hours of the morning. Headlights flickered, then cut out. A figure moved briefly in the glow before vanishing into the trees. The timestamp matched the window when Emily had disappeared. Together, these fragments, DNA and video, wove a new thread of possibility. Detectives felt the shift immediately. Files that had gathered dust were reopened. Conference rooms once empty were filled with maps and photographs again. Emily's name echoed through the sheriff's office halls. The case was alive. For the Parker family, the news was a fragile beam of hope. Susan Parker listened as detectives explained the developments, her hands trembling. After so many months of silence, she barely dared believe. But when she heard the words DNA match, her eyes filled with tears. For the first time, she felt the weight might finally lift. Investigators worked around the clock. They traced the DNA hit to a regional database entry. Someone with a prior record. Someone who had once brushed against the law but slipped into obscurity. The grainy surveillance added weight, suggesting proximity and opportunity. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened. The breakthrough carried more than evidence. It carried momentum. Detectives who had once shuffled the case aside now felt urgency burn in their veins. They held late-night meetings, cross-referenced phone records, and re-interviewed witnesses long silent. The town that had once resigned itself to uncertainty began to buzz again with whispers of progress. Still, nothing was certain. The DNA was partial, not complete. The video was grainy, not definitive. Doubt lingered, the kind that had crushed so many leads before. But this time felt different. Technology had breathed life into the evidence, and science had opened a door that once seemed locked forever. By March, the investigation reached a tipping point. Detectives prepared search warrants, armed with their new findings. The suspect, once a name buried in old notes, would soon come into sharp focus. Bozeman, Montana, did not yet know it, but the truth was about to shake the town to its core. The breakthrough was only the beginning. The real storm had yet to arrive. By the time the new DNA profile surfaced, the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office needed fresh eyes. The case was reassigned to Detective Laura Mitchell, a woman whose name was whispered with both respect and caution. Laura was known for her relentlessness. She had solved cases that colleagues had abandoned, driven not by glory, but by empathy for families left in the dark. At 40, with a quiet intensity in her gaze, she had made a career of seeing what others had missed. When the Parker file landed on her desk, she did not see another stack of cold documents. She saw a young woman with a future stolen, a grieving family still searching for light, and a community left with unanswered questions. She told herself on the first night, "I will not let this case die here." Laura started where most detectives would not, by walking the streets of Bozeman again. She drove to the trailhead where Emily's car had been found, standing under the same dim streetlights that had flickered 2 years earlier. She studied the silence of the place, picturing Emily stepping out her car, picturing the darkness that swallowed her. Then came the interviews. Laura went back to Emily's friends, professors, and co-workers. She listened carefully, not just to words but to pauses, hesitations, the subtle discomforts that earlier investigators had dismissed. Over and over, one detail returned: a truck. Friends recalled Emily mentioning a white pickup that had followed her once after work. It had been shrugged off as paranoia back then. But now, with the gas station footage in hand, Laura paid attention. The surveillance clip, grainy and blurred, showed headlights switching off, then the outline of a vehicle. With enhanced software, Laura studied the frame for hours. The boxy silhouette was unmistakable. It was a white pickup. Cross-referencing DMV records, Laura narrowed it down to a handful of registered vehicles in the county. One name made her pause: Mark Reynolds, 42, a construction worker who lived on the outskirts of town. His record was troubling. Years earlier, he had been charged in a domestic violence case that was later dropped when the victim refused to testify. There were whispers of bar fights, aggressive outbursts, and neighbors who quietly described him as unstable. Laura pulled his old interview notes from 2021. He had been questioned briefly. His alibi accepted at face value. He claimed he'd been working late at a job site the night Emily vanished. Yet as Laura studied the transcript, small inconsistencies appeared. He had first said he was with co-workers, then later mentioned being alone. His timeline wavered. Detectives back then had let it slide. Laura did not. She visited the job site records. Timesheets were incomplete, signatures messy. Several co-workers admitted, when pressed again, that they had not actually seen Reynolds the entire evening. One even recalled that his white truck had been absent for hours. What had once seemed like a firm alibi now cracked under Laura's relentless questioning. At night, Laura kept Emily's photograph pinned above her desk. She reread the case notes, hunting for overlooked fragments. Fiber evidence on Emily's jacket. Soil samples that match construction sites. Phone records with unexplained gaps. Slowly, a pattern emerged, each piece aligning with Reynolds. Her obsession grew. She drove past Reynolds' home, noting the same white pickup parked in his driveway, its paint chipped, its bed rusted with years of heavy labor. She imagined Emily's fear that this truck had pulled up behind her on that October night. But Laura knew suspicion was not enough. She needed proof strong enough to withstand scrutiny. The partial DNA profile was her key. She obtained a warrant to collect Reynolds' DNA, watching as the swab was sealed and sent to the lab. Days stretched into weeks. Every hour waited with anticipation. When the results came back, Laura held the envelope with shaking hands. The partial match strengthened. Mark Reynolds could not be ruled out. Statistically, the odds pointed directly at him. Combined with the surveillance, the broken alibi, and his history of violence, the case against him began to solidify. Laura presented her findings to the sheriff's office. Some colleagues remained cautious, wary of pinning hopes on a case that had betrayed them so many times before. But Laura's voice was steady. "This man has been hiding in plain sight," she said. "And Emily Parker deserves justice." Her obsession had transformed into determination. For the first time, the pieces of Emily's murder pointed to a name, a face, a man who had thought he had slipped away. But the path ahead was fraught with risk. Confronting Reynolds would not be easy. He was unpredictable, volatile, and perhaps desperate to keep his secret buried. The hunt was narrowing, the truth closing in, And soon, the entire town of Bozeman would learn the shocking identity of Emily Parker's killer. For years, Mark Reynolds had blended into the fabric of Bozeman. To most, he was a reliable handyman. The man you call when your fence needed fixing or when your roof leaked after heavy snow. He lived a quiet life on the outskirts of town, rarely drawing attention to himself. But beneath that ordinary surface, Reynolds carried a history of violence. Old court records revealed charges of assault. Neighbors whispered his temper, and women who had once crossed his path remembered his unsettling persistence. Now, in 2023, he stood at the center of the Parker case. Detective Laura Mitchell had gathered the evidence carefully. The partial DNA match from Emily's jacket, the grainy but damning footage of his white pickup, and the cracks in his alibi. When she knocked on his door with a warrant in hand, the mask of the trusted handyman began to fracture. Reynolds looked older than his years, his face worn by hard labor and harder living. His eyes flickered with unease as deputies searched his home, bagging work boots, jackets, and tools for forensic testing. Still, he denied everything. "I did not touch that girl," he told detectives. "I had nothing to do with her." His voice carried a defensive sharpness, but underneath it, there was fear. In the interrogation room, the tension was suffocating. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting pale shadows across the table where Reynolds sat with his arms folded tightly. Detective Mitchell placed the evidence before him. Photographs of Emily, the footage of his truck, the lab results linking him to DNA fragments found on her clothing. "This is you, Mark," she said firmly, sliding the image of the white pickup across the table. "And this is your DNA. It does not lie." Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. His first response was to attack the evidence. "That could be anybody's truck," he muttered. "And DNA? You cops always get that wrong. Maybe she brushed against me in town. I worked all over Bozeman. People know me." Laura leaned forward, her voice steady. "You were near that trailhead, the night Emily disappeared. Your alibi does not hold. You left work, and you followed her. The evidence is here, Mark. Stop lying." For long minutes, Reynolds resisted. He leaned back, crossed his arms, shook his head. But with every denial, Laura returned with another inconsistency, another detail he could not explain. The fibers on Emily's jacket that matched the material in his truck. The phone tower pings placing him near the trail. The missing hours he could not account for. The room grew heavier with each passing second. Reynolds' bravado began to crumble. His hands fidgeted. Sweat formed along his brow. He glanced toward the door as if looking for escape. Finally, Laura pressed with one last question, her voice low, deliberate. "Why did you follow her, Mark? Why Emily?" The silence that followed was deafening. Reynolds stared at the table, his jaw clenched, his breathing quickened. Then, as if a dam burst, he whispered, "I did not mean for it to go that far." The confession unraveled piece by piece. He admitted that he had seen Emily at the bookstore weeks before, her kindness leaving an impression that twisted inside his troubled mind. He began watching her, learning her routines. The night she vanished, he saw her leave the university library and decided to follow. His truck idled near the trailhead as she pulled in, unaware she was being hunted. Reynolds described how he confronted her, how anger and obsession collided in that dark moment. He grabbed her, pulled her into the woods, ignoring her pleas. He confessed to striking her, silencing her screams. Panic consumed him afterward. He tried to cover his tracks, moving her body deeper into the trees, wiping surfaces, convincing himself no one would connect the crime to him. Listening to the words spill out, detectives sat in grim silence. The truth was worse than anyone had imagined. Emily's final hours were filled with terror, and the man who once walked freely among his neighbors had been her killer all along. When the confession was complete, Reynolds slumped his chair, his face hollow. "I never wanted it to happen like that," he muttered, but his words carried no weight. The room remained still, every person inside knowing that justice had finally caught up with him. Detective Mitchell gathered the files, her expression unyielding. "You took her life, Mark, and now you will face the consequences." With that, deputies escorted him out, his wrists bound in steel cuffs. The man once trusted to fix broken things had destroyed a life instead, and now his own freedom was broken beyond repair. News of the arrest spread through Bozeman like wildfire. Residents were stunned that the man they had waved to on mornings, the handyman who worked on their porches and fences, had been living with such a dark secret. For the Parker family, the moment brought a mix of relief and devastation. They finally knew the truth, but the truth was unbearable. Emily Parker's killer had been hiding in plain sight. The confession marked the climax of the case. The mystery was solved, but the pain of what had been revealed would haunt Bozeman for years to come. Mark Reynolds' arrest on a crisp October morning sent shockwaves through Bozeman. Patrol cars surrounded his modest home, their flashing lights painting the quiet street in red and blue. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, stunned that the man who had once repaired their fences and cleared their driveways was now led away in handcuffs, accused of town's most haunting crime. The news spread quickly. Headlines carried his mugshot across Montana, while national outlets picked up the story of the handyman turned killer. For the Parker family, the sight of Mark Reynolds in custody brought a complicated wave of emotions. Relief that Emily's killer was finally behind bars. Grief that nothing, not even justice, could return her to them. In the courthouse, the hearings revealed chilling details. Prosecutors laid out the evidence: the DNA, the surveillance footage, the fibers, and most damning of all, Reynolds' own confession. The gallery sat in heavy silence as the story of Emily's final moments was read aloud. Some wept openly. Others sat frozen, unable to believe that the man they once trusted in their homes had stalked and murdered a young woman full of promise. When Reynolds entered the courtroom, shackled and flanked by deputies, gasps echoed. He kept his eyes down, avoiding the gaze of Emily's parents. At the defense table, he appeared smaller, diminished, a shell of the man who had once projected strength with his tools and callous hands. The Parker family spoke during the victim impact statements. Emily's mother, voice trembling, described the daily ache of absence, the empty chair at dinner, the unopened birthday cards, the silence where her daughter's laughter should have been. Her father, usually quiet, told the court, "We prayed for answers for 15 years. We prayed for justice. We have it now, but we will never have her back." His words hung in the air like a final truth no sentence could undo. Residents of Bozeman also felt the aftershocks. The town that had once prided itself on safety and neighborly trust now looked over its shoulder. Parents grew more protective, warning their daughters never to walk alone. "If it could happen here, it could happen anywhere," one resident told reporters. The idea that evil could wear the face of a trusted handyman shook their sense of security to its core. Detective Laura Mitchell, standing outside the courthouse after the verdict, summed it up simply. This was not just about solving a case. It was about giving Emily her voice back. And today she spoke. The trial concluded with Reynolds sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, stern and unflinching, declared, "You took an innocent life, and in doing so, you stole peace from an entire community. You will never again walk free." For Emily's family, the sentence offered closure but not healing. They visited her grave after the ruling, laying fresh flowers, whispering prayers. They knew the pain would always linger, but they also knew her story had been told, her name spoken loudly in a court of law, her dignity restored. The aftermath in Bozeman was a reminder of fragility. Evil had lived quietly among them, unnoticed, for years. And yet justice, slow, patient, but relentless, had finally prevailed. Emily Parker would never come home, but her memory lived on, through vigils, scholarships in her name, and the renewed determination of detectives who refused to let cold cases fade into silence. Her light continued to shine. Bozeman carried scars, yes, but it also carried resolve, a promise whispered in the community. Never again. Emily Parker's story does not end in courtroom. Her life, her dreams, and the legacy she left behind continue to ripple through Bozeman and far beyond. In the months after Mark Reynolds' conviction, the Parker family worked tirelessly to transform their grief into something meaningful. They established the Emily Parker Scholarship Fund at Montana State University, dedicated to students pursuing environmental science. Each year, A young scholar now carries forward the same passion Emily once had for protecting the wilderness she loved so deeply. In this way, her voice echoes through future generations. Detective Laura Mitchell, reflecting on the case, often spoke about the lesson it carved into her heart. Cold cases test your patience, she admitted in one interview, but they also test your belief in justice. Emily taught us to never give up, even when the trail seems impossible to follow. Her words captured not only the perseverance of law enforcement, but also the resilience of community that refused to let Emily's name be forgotten. Forensic experts also noted how the case symbolized a turning point. The partial DNA profile, once invisible to older technology, became the key that unlocked the truth. It reminded investigators everywhere that science continues to evolve, and with it, the chances of justice grow stronger, even for those silenced years before. In Bozeman, the candlelight vigils never truly ended. Every October, townspeople gather at the trailhead where Emily's car was found. They light candles, share memories, and remind one another that their town will not be defined by fear, but by unity. For Emily's mother, these gatherings are both painful and healing. "I see her in every flame," she whispered once, "and I see hope." The story leaves us with powerful truth. Life is fragile. Safety is never guaranteed. But community, love, and determination can turn even the darkest chapters into lessons of strength. Emily's case is a reminder that behind every statistic, behind every headline, is a human life, a daughter, a friend, a dreamer. Though sorrow lingers, closure's been found. Emily Parker's light continues to shine, not only in the mountains she loved, but in the hearts of those who carry her memory forward. And as the final reflection fades, one message remains clear: never give up hope.